So now we're going to talk about consumer offsets commit strategies. Currently, everything's been working magically for us, but it's time for us to understand what happens when we commit the offsets. And so to me, there are two most common patterns for committing offsets in a consumer application. They're not only two, but these are the most common, so I'm showing them to you. Two strategies are the following. The number one, which is the easy one, which is the one we've been using, is to enable autocommit equals true, and that's a default, and then do synchronous processing of batches. So this is exactly what we've been doing. We have this enabled by default, and then we've been processing our batches synchronously. That means we won't pull up until we've done all the processing of the messages of the one that we just received. The second strategy is enable autocommit equals false. So we explicitly disable the capability to commit automatically, and we will manually commit the offsets. So this one has an advantage. I'll show you which one it is if you need it. So let's dive into each of these strategies. The first one, as I said, is enable autocommit equals true, which is the default, and synchronous processing of batches. This is in pseudocode what it looks like. We are going to loop and do .poll every 100 milliseconds, and we get a batch out of it, which is a list of records, basically. And then we'll do something synchronous with that batch. And do something synchronous, in our example, is to insert data into Elasticsearch, one at a time. Basically, with autocommit enabled by default, offsets will be committed automatically for you at a regular interval, which is 5 seconds by default, every time you call poll. So this is something that's been implemented and saying, okay, your consumers will commit whatever has been done automatically every 5,000 milliseconds. So this is a nice behavior, but if you don't use synchronous processing, if you do something asynchronous, then without knowing, you'll be in at most once behavior because the offsets will be committed before your data is processed. And so this is why I think that enable autocommit equals true is quite risky, especially for beginners, which is why I really like to specify enable autocommit equals false and do a synchronous processing of batches. So here's what it looks like. We have the batch and we accumulate records. And then when your batch has enough records, you do something synchronous with the batch, and then you commit sync the offsets. And basically that makes an explicit commit happen. So this one I really like because you control when you commit the offsets and what's the condition for committing them. And an example of this is when you accumulate records into a buffer and then you flush the buffer into a database and you commit the offsets then. So to make it into practice and to show how this would work, we're going to implement this on our Elasticsearch Java consumer. So see you in the next lecture.